Let's talk to Robert Jenrick, Housing, Communities and Local Government Secretary and MP for Newark, which is in Tier 3 this morning. As of next week. Good morning to you, Robert.
Hi, good morning, Julia.
Good morning. I'm a little bit confused this morning. I've been paying attention an awful lot to everything everyone's been saying. And I remember distinctly that the Prime Minister said we had to have a lockdown because the tiered approach wasn't working. Even though we had a tiered approach to avoid a lockdown, we had a lockdown anyway. Yesterday at the press conference, he said the tiered approach was working and that's why we were returning to it. Was the tiered approach working or not?
The tiered approach was working, Julia.
Why did we have a lockdown then?
And most people, I think, agree that it's right to take a localised, proportionate approach rather than a blanket national lockdown. But what we did learn from the former tiered approach was that some of the tiers just weren't strong enough to have the desired effect. And so if you want to have this localised approach, you've got to make sure the tiers are sufficiently robust to do the job. And that means slightly stronger restrictions in Tier 2 and in Tier 3 of the kind that we've set out. Now, I appreciate that's very difficult. But if we can make that work, then it does mean that we shouldn't need a third national lockdown, which none of us would want to see. And it should mean that the country can be steered through the final few months before the vaccine programme takes over and gets us back to a more normal way of living.
So a third national lockdown is now the next threat we're facing, if we're not good.
No, I'm saying that if we can make the tiered approach work, then we can ward off that threat and we can ensure that this approach gets us through to the point where we're able to return to something akin to normality.
But Boris Johnson said yesterday that the tiered approach,
vaccine program.
Yes, the tiered approach was working, and we know the tiered approach was working. We know even in Liverpool, for instance, in early October, when Liverpool was in Tier 2, that the infection rate was already going down, and not sort of vaguely going down. You can see the graph yourself, official data. It was absolutely plummeting down. That was long before they went into Tier 3. So we know that it was working.
Well, the advice of SAGE, who reviewed the tiered approach over the November period, was that the measures that we had in place in Tier 3, as it was, were working in most parts of the country, although not all, and it could benefit from being slightly stronger. Remember, we were in the old Tier 3, we had a baseline, and then we asked local areas to consider whether they wanted to go above that. Some places did, some places didn't. This approach has a uniform Tier 3 for all those parts of the country that have to be part of it, and it is slightly stronger than the old baseline. And it should mean that if you're in that, then you will be on a path to de-escalation at the next review point or one shortly thereafter, and be moving down the tiers rather than playing catch-up as we were seeing in the past. Okay. And there will be a meaningful review after 14 days, which will be on the 16th of December. And so for many parts of the country, particularly those which have been widely reported as being quite finely balanced judgments, there will be an opportunity to come down the tiers then before Christmas.
Yes, the Prime Minister said, your tier is not your destiny. Every area has the means of escape. We'll come on to the mass testing aspect first of all. Have you seen the evidence for why each individual area, city, region is put into their individual tiers? We know there are some areas, they've got much lower rates of infection and going down, put into Tier 3, whereas others in Tier 2 have higher. We've seen some areas, it's a whole counties like Kent being put into Tier 3, whereas other parts of the world, just a city or a town has been put into Tier 3 and local areas in Tier 2. Have you seen the actual categorical evidence, and is that evidence going to be published before the vote in the House of Commons on Tuesday?
I have seen evidence. We have already published both the 5 tests, which were used to judge where an area was allocated within the tiers, and a rationale as to why that particular place sits within that tier. The tests were assessed by the scientists that advise us, working with the local directors of public health who've got the knowledge on the ground. And that's the way each of the review points also every 14 days will operate in the future.
And you don't think that local mayors might have a viewpoint and some input worth having? Because local mayors have told us that they were not asked or consulted on any basis whatsoever. Is it not possible that a directly elected local mayor of any city in this country, any region, might perhaps have some local input and data that they might think that was worth considering?
Well, their views are welcome.
No, they weren't welcome, though, were they? They weren't considered.
Their views were welcomed.
When?
The route to do that is through your local directors of public health, who are the health professionals in each area. And so
I'm sorry. Can I just I just want to clarify. So unelected public health officials, you'll listen to them, but you won't listen to the directly elected mayors of some of our greatest cities. I just want to clarify. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we do listen to the elected
When?
mayors of cities. Well,
When?
many
Well,
of
Andy
them.
Burnham said he wasn't listened to.
Well, I'm not sure whether Andy Burnham made contact. As far as I'm aware, he didn't make contact with me, but many of the other elected mayors did speak to me and made their views known. Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, for example, Andy Street, the mayor of the West Midlands. But this is a public health decision. It's not primarily a political decision.
Isn't it?
It's one that should be guided. It's a ministerial decision, but one informed by the public health advice. And so it's the local directors of public health who are the ones who have the statutory responsibility. And so local council leaders and members of parliament and others are in constant contact with their directors of public health, making their views known, looking at the local evidence, and that then is used to make these decisions.
But it's not just a public health matter, is it? And this is something I've been asking for, and you confirmed that before the lockdown we didn't actually have there was no internal proper cost-benefit analysis, impact assessment of the wider cost. When we make decisions to cut at all costs risks from catching and dying of COVID, we have a wider cost to people of other health problems, more people dying, as we now have seen clearly from the first lockdown, from other causes. We know the massive economic impact. This is, as you say, a political decision. Surely those wider impacts should be known. Are we going to see publication before next Tuesday, the vote in the House of Commons, when MPs have to agree to all this, an analysis, a full cost-benefit analysis of the wider costs of these decisions?
Yeah, well, you'll be pleased to hear that we will be publishing an analysis that has been conducted of the health, the social and the economic consequences of the tiered approach. And so that will be available for you, for members of the public and for MPs.
When's that?
To consider. I don't have the exact date for that, but it'll be in the coming days.
I mean, it must have been compiled already, because that's surely what you base the decision on. So why can't it be published now? Or is it just going to be cobbled together after the fact?
Well, there is an analysis and it's going to be published in the coming days. So you'll have to wait just a little bit longer.
Why can't it be published now?
But they will be being
Put
published.
It online.
And it will enable the debate in Parliament to be informed by that analysis. But the decision on the tiers is primarily a public health decision. It is looking at what is the rate of infection in any particular area, what's happening to the over 60s, the people most likely to be unwell, what's going on in local hospitals, what's happening for the testing program, what's the rate of positivity where people are being tested. Those are the core decisions and pieces of information that are then used to form a balanced judgment about what's going on in any particular area.
Okay, but as Tim Spector from King's College, who's been carrying out the Zoe study, which has been one of the biggest studies and it's proved to be very accurate when you compared with the ONS data when it actually comes out. They've said places like for instance, like London, key rates for new cases over 60s, they haven't changed in 5 weeks, and in many other parts of the country as well. So we're not seeing that. What evidence have you seen that pubs and pubs, particularly pubs that don't serve food, but even those that do serve food and restaurants, are driving the increase in cases? Why should hospitality be under so many restrictions?
Well, the evidence is not that hospitality is the sole cause of the rate of infection, but undoubtedly for a virus that thrives on social interaction, places where you come together, particularly indoors, where you meet up with people either from your own household or indeed others, are the likely places where the virus will thrive. And so it's a logical place to consider. I appreciate that's very difficult, and there are hard choices at play here. We've chosen to ensure that education can remain open. We've chosen to ensure that workplaces can remain open, although we're asking people to work from home if they can.
Well, workplaces can remain open if they're not involved in hospitality.
That's right, but that's the vast majority of the population are able to either work from home or go to work if it's in manufacturing, agriculture, food processing, the settings where you obviously can't work from home.
Okay.
So we entirely appreciate this is very difficult for hospitality. We are trying to put in place support like the furlough scheme, the business grants and the discretionary schemes that local councils now have at their disposal. And hospitality is able to trade through takeaway and delivery services that we put in place back in March.
But as we know, a lot of those aren't viable. Just finally, I know you have to go, it's 9 o'clock, but we're told that mass testing is the route out. The Prime Minister said yesterday that we get out of your tiers, it's not your destiny, we're through mass testing, the same way that Liverpool escaped tier 3. Liverpool's infection rate was going down a month before testing was brought in, I say before even tier 3. Other areas nearby didn't have any mass testing, these rapid lateral flow tests, and their rates also went down. Why do you believe that mass testing is the route out of this tier system?
Well, the Prime Minister and the Chief Medical Officer have been clear that this is a tool, it's a weapon in the arsenal of a local area that wants to bring the rate of infection down. This is a new approach. There is reason to believe that it works, that it makes an impact, but that evidence will build with time as we do this in more parts of the country. We're not mandating it. It's available to local authorities that find themselves in tier 3 to use if they want to. And a number have already contacted me saying that they do want to do it because they want to strain every sinew, pull every lever that's available to them to try to help their local area.
But wasn't necessarily what I asked. I mean, how is mass testing the route out if mass testing wasn't the reason why infections went down in Liverpool?
Well, the advice that I've received is that it was a contributing factor.
It couldn't have been a contributing factor because the rates were going down and had plummeted down a month before mass testing was brought in. I can, if you want, I can send you the graph of official government data that shows that. So I mean, unless mass testing has a time machine, it couldn't have caused it.
I've seen those graphs, Julia, and it's not.
So it couldn't be mass testing that caused the fall in infections then.
Well, no, the mass testing was a contributing factor to the success of Liverpool in bringing the rate of infection down.
No, how could it have been if most of that fall happened before mass testing was brought in? How is that physically possible?
No, what you're saying is, was it the sole cause?
No, I didn't say no. How could it cause it at all? No, we had.
It has contributed to the fall that we've seen.
After mass testing was brought in, there was a plateau and the fall stopped for a few weeks. For a week.
Well, it plateaued and then it started to fall again.
Yeah, so how was mass testing the cause of the fall in infections once again? It could not have been, could it?
It was a contributing factor.
It fell from over 500 to 200.
Julia, I can only tell you what the Chief Medical Officer and the scientific advisors that I've spoken to have said.
And I can only tell you what the data says, the evidence.
A difference to the scale of the reduction in the rate of infection that we've seen in Liverpool. And it's something, therefore, that's available to other parts of the country who want to deploy it. I think its benefits are clear. It's a way of identifying the asymptomatic people.
The asymptomatic people who don't pass the infection along, as according to new studies. With all due respect, is there anything this government does that is based on the actual evidence that the official data provides us with? Is there anything at all that's based on evidence?
Well, absolutely, Julia. And the mass testing work that we're doing, like many other countries in the world are pursuing, is on the basis of the advice of the scientists. Okay. It's a new approach, and it's one that local authorities can choose to take forward if they wish to.
I'll leave you to your next interview, Robert Jenrick. Appreciate you coming on. Housing Communities Local Government Secretary. Final word to Dave Chawner, who's waiting. We're so late for the news now. We may as well, Dave. I just want to bang my head on the table. I'm no psychologist, but you sounded a little bit frustrated there. I'm going to need therapy after this. I really am. But Robert Jenrick's pointing out he's seen the same graph. I mean, this is official data. It went down from over 500 cases per 100,000 to 200 per 100,000 in the space of a few weeks before mass testing began. Look, I have no answers. I just wish in my industry there was a scapegoat like Sage's for the government. It's a get out of jail free card. Yeah, exactly. They'll be using this for years, everyone, won't they?